Hey guys, Logan here from Popular Woodworking Magazine. So we just shipped off the most recent issue to our printer. So that gives us a week or so to kind of catch up and work on upcoming projects and catch up on some video projects that we've wanted to shoot for the last couple of months. So when we are deciding what types of videos we want to shoot, a lot of times we're basing that on what articles we've done in the magazine and what has been popular. One of those articles recently was a dust collection article that we did here in the shop about setting up a new dust collection system and some of the best practices to do that. So I figured we'd take a moment today, kind of walk around the shop, talk about some of the rules that you want to follow when you are setting up dust collection in your shop and what you need to know to get the most out of it. So let's head over to the dust collector and start right there. So the first rule when you're setting up a dust collection system is you want to size your dust collector for your shop. Now, I'm going to mention one thing real quick. This is not a sponsored video. I have an Oneida system, and Oneida is the one that helped me set up my dust collection piping in here. So I might reference them a few times, but this is not sponsored. The first system that we had in here was an Oneida Supercell, and it was a great dust collector, except that as we added more machines and we had more and more people working in the shop here, we needed a larger system to deal with more blast gates being open at once. So we went ahead and upgraded to an Oneida 5-horse Gorilla with the Smart Boost. And that means that this thing will variable speed the motor. It will add more suction as more suction is required at a particular tool. So if I drop down to a smaller blast gate, you need to pull more air through that small blast gate, and this guy will do it. So you want to make sure that whatever dust collector you choose is sized right for your shop and the tools that you are using. Now, most dust collector manufacturers can help kind of steer you into whatever unit is best sized for what you do. But in my mind, it's better to have a unit that is larger than you need so you can grow into that unit without having to replace it down the road. So this is a 5-horse unit with that Smart Boost, as I said, and I chose to grab the 55-gallon drum here for chip depositing, which it's about as big as you can get in a kind of home shop setting, but it does fill up very quickly, especially when running a lot of material through the planer. So I'm glad I went with the 55-gallon drum. Now, this unit here is mounted as low as it can be to the wall. One thing to remember is that with a lot of these, you can actually mount this entire unit as high as you can and then just run a pipe down here to the barrel. And that's something I will probably do in the near future, is get this guy up in the air. That will remove this filter kind of out of this working area and open this up a little bit. It's just this is a very heavy unit, so I'm going to need a second set of hands to get that up there. Now, looking at the dust collector itself, nothing super crazy here. There is an on-off switch here that I just zip tied to the filter. So if I don't have the remote on me, I can turn it on here at the unit. Also have a light up top that indicates when this barrel starts to get full, because if it does fill up, it starts loading up into the cyclone and it will actually get into the filter here as well. And then it's just going to choke the entire system down. So you want to pay attention to that light. And of course, every time that light starts blinking, I empty the barrel. Yeah, right. But this unit is sized appropriately for the amount of tools we have in this shop, which is a planer, a joiner, 2 bandsaws, table saw, router table, and then I have a couple of dead ends in other spots for potential future usage. So the next thing that you really want to think about as you're setting up a dust collection system is what machines make the most shavings and the most dust, and then position those the closest as you can to the dust collector. So let's head over to the joiner and planer and look at those. Now, to get your dust collection system as efficient as it can be, you need to allow it to pull as much air as it physically can. And to do that, you have to run as big a line out of the dust collector as it will take. So something like our Dust Gorilla will take a 7-inch line. So it has a 7-inch port on the side of it, and we are running a 7-inch main trunk line. So that means that that line comes out of the dust collector, goes up to the ceiling, and then runs through the shop. Now you want to position the tools that make the most volume of shavings and chips as close to the dust collector as you can. That way it's the most efficient. And for us, that's the planer and then the jointer. And we actually have two jointers in here. One of them is in service right now. But those make the most chips of anything in the shop. So we have positioned those as close as we can. So out of the dust collector, we have a 7-inch main trunk line, and then it hits right above the jointer and planer here, and that 7-inch drops down. And what I have here is a reducer that reduces that 7-inch down into two 6-inch ports and another 6-inch port up here for the big jointer. Once that is put back into service, that actually has 2 ports on it. That allows me to pull a huge volume of air and get all those chips out of that planer up and into that dust collector super efficiently. Now, the idea of a main trunk line is one that I can't stress enough. Allowing the volume of air to travel through that's necessary to get to the dust collector and not necking that down to, like, say, a 4-inch line throughout your whole shop is super important to have an efficient shop. So after the 6-inch line, we continue on through the shop, and then we start necking down a little bit further. So something like the bandsaw, that's pulling a 5-inch line. The table saw is pulling a 4-inch line. So let's go ahead and step over to the table saw and look at those, and I'll show you how I have that set up, because I have another addition to the dust collection system there that I find really useful. Now, keeping in mind the main trunk line idea where you have that one big diameter pipe coming through the shop, that has to end somewhere. And in our shop, that ends right here above me. And I've actually deadheaded it. What I mean by that is I put a cap on the end, and I've kind of left it as an option for further addition if I need to. My original plan was to send that line over to the drill press, but I'm not convinced that I need to run dust collection to the drill press. But what that deadhead allows me to do is if I do need to come back and add additional duct work for a tool, I can do that in the future. And that's something to keep in mind, is that you want to set up your dust collection system so that you can expand on it and add tools as your shop grows. And also keep in mind that no system is 100% perfect. There's always room for you to add and fix things. Now, here at the table saw, we have that main trunk line coming through this wall. I actually cut a hole in the wall to run that through here. And I have a 5-inch dust collection line coming off of that main 7-incher. And then down here at this Y, a 4-inch off to the side that's running to the table saw. That runs to both the overarm dust collector and the in-cabinet one. And then I have a 5-inch going down to the floor. And what this allows me to do is to open this up, and that runs suction down to this floor sweep. And I find that super valuable because I can just grab a broom, and any dust that does make it to the floor, I can just sweep right up into that sweep. Now, of course, the dust collector is a main part of this. Your layout is another part. And the third part is picking the right lines for your shop. So let's head over to the bench and take a look at a couple of options of dedicated dust collection lines and why I think they're better than PVC. So once you have a plan worked up for your shop, whether that's you laying it out or you utilizing somebody like Oneida that will do that for you, then you have to decide what form of piping you want to use in your shop. Because in my mind, using flex hose for everything is okay, but it's a temporary solution, and it actually kind of, I think, robs your dust collection system of power. Using hard piping, I think, gives you a little bit more suction. There's a lot less drag, and you can really optimize your system. So a lot of people will come into a dust collection plan thinking, oh, I'm just going to use PVC. And I think there are several reasons why you should not do that. First of all, we are using some big pipe. You know, this is a 7-inch pipe here. Buying 7-inch PVC is very expensive, and it's hard to find. So I think at the end of the day, you're probably not actually saving any money by doing that. The other thing is that the fittings for PVC pipe are not necessarily designed for airflow. When we're talking about a dust collection system, we want big, long sweeps where the air isn't encountering any resistance. We want that air to maintain its velocity throughout the entire system. So if you're looking at something like a PVC plumbing fitting, you may have a T or a hard bend, and we want to avoid those at all costs in a dust collection system. And the other thing is that with a PVC pipe, a 4-inch PVC pipe, is not a 4-inch diameter like a dust collection pipe is. So getting that PVC pipe to actually hook up to your fittings on, let's say, your table saw, you're going to go through a bunch of adapters and reducers, and anytime you start adding those into a system, you're increasing drag on the entire system, and it's going to reduce its overall efficiency. So while it may sound like a great idea and you may save a couple of bucks on the front end, I think in the long term it actually ends up costing you more. And that's not to even mention that PVC can really build up a static charge, and there's been instances of people getting good thumps from a PVC dust collection system because that dust moving with that much air creates a lot of static electricity. And heck, even here in the shop when I'm using the floor sweeper, which is kind of a roll around vacuum for the dust collector, I've gotten static shocks off that, and I couldn't imagine what a PVC shock would be like. So let's talk about the piping that dust collection companies actually suggest that you use. Now, there are 3 standard types. And we kind of have, I'm going to say a good, better, best, but that doesn't necessarily mean that. There is a cheaper option, a middle option, and then the most expensive option. I think it depends on your situation and what you're doing. So the first is this guy here. Now this is a rigid pipe, it doesn't collapse, and this is spiral pipe. This comes in set lengths and you can cut it to size. And the one thing I like about this is that it is extremely rigid. This is extremely heavy duty and heavy gauge. And I think this would be really good for really high pressure systems that are need a really strong pipe on them. And the inside kind of has this micro dot texture in there that I think helps reduce drag. So that's a really good option. And a lot of these you'll use the same fittings for. There are spiral fittings and other fittings. A lot of them use the same principle where you're talking about Y fittings, where stuff's coming off at 45 degrees, long bends, stuff like that. So spiral pipe's a good option for a really rigid pipe. Now, the easiest install pipe is something like this guy. And this pipe comes in set lengths, and this is a kind of quick connect pipe. So this has a flange on the end, and then these 2 pipes would butt up to each other, and then you'd simply add this quick connect snap here. Now this is really good for installing quickly. You can set up your entire shop with this because you're just snapping everything together and it's ready to go. There's an O-ring inside of this little snap collar that helps get you a really good seal. Now, the issue that I see with these is you are a little limited on the lengths that this is manufactured in because they have that rolled flange on the end. And coming back to adjust the layout down the road, you may be taking stuff apart and having to buy different size sections rather than just cutting them off. But this is a really good option if you are very set on your layout and you want something that is quick and easy to install. Now, the piping I used here in this shop is something called snap lock. And you can see that this kind of looks like ductwork that you'd see in your home HVAC system, but this is a lot heavier gauge. You can't just go to one of the big box stores and buy the ductwork for an HVAC system. This is a lot thicker to help stand up to the pressure that this system is putting out. But this comes in a, let's call it a roll for lack of a better term, and it has this seam down the edge. And this seam snaps together, so when you are laying out your system, you can cut this to length, and then the entire thing will just snap together. Now the ends on this are crimped so that they slip together really well. So obviously you want to keep that crimped end on whichever section you're using if you're cutting it. And then that joint is then screwed together with a couple of sheet metal screws, and then you do want to seal that. Now I've sealed everything in this shop with the foil tape, and that works really well. And actually I had Colin down here working in the shop as I was sealing up the system, and I was amazed how much taping each joint reduced not only the noise, but it increased the suction at the tool. I think all those tiny little air gaps around each of the joints really add up. But once I went through and taped everything, the system was fantastic. You don't need to worry about this long joint because that doesn't leak air. It's more where the two pieces of tubing come together. Now this snap lock is what we installed here in the shop, mainly because it's the most economical. It is the hardest to install. I mean, obviously you're snapping together the seam on each one, cutting it to length, and then you're adding the screws and the tape as you're installing it. But because I was paying for this system here, I knew that I wanted something that was fairly economical, but it wasn't PVC because of all those reasons I listed previously. And I've been super happy with this stuff. And one thing that I do like is that this is pretty easy to add onto later. They make saddle joints that you can actually go to your existing pipe, cut a hole in, and then use a caulk to apply that with self-tapping screws, and you can add another drop wherever you need it off of one of your main trunk lines. So once you've decided on the hardline piping that you're going to use, whether it's the snap lock, the quick connect, or the spiral, we kind of get down to the business end where those come down to the tools. So let's talk about how that goes together. Now, as I mentioned, the spiral and the snap lock pretty much use the same sort of fittings. What I like to use are these guys, and these are adjustable elbows. They have a long sweep, but more importantly is that each individual section will rotate so you can kind of dial it in to whatever shape you need to get down to your tool. Now, keeping in mind, obviously, that long straight shots and long slow bends are our friends in the system to maintain velocity, we can do some adjustment here. And these are really nice because you can buy one of these fittings and then you can either use it as a 45, you can use it as a 90, whatever it needs for that application. But once that piping comes down towards the tool, much like at our table saw, we need to go from whatever that trunk or drop size is down to the tool size. So that's where something like this reducer and Y come into play. This is something I would have coming off of a 6-inch pipe down into two 4-inch pipes. And this is exactly what I have set up there at the table saw. One end goes to the table saw, one goes to the floor sweep. It happens to be a 5-inch at the table saw, but something similar to this. Now we need a way to shut off tools that we're not using. That's where a blast gate comes into play. These metal blast gates work really well. Those are put in line, depending on your application, either at the top side, up there, or they can be on the other ends of the Y if you're trying to shut off certain tools. I have something similar set up at the router table where I have a larger line going to the bottom of the router table, and then I have a smaller line going off to the fence. And if I need to shut one or the other off, let's say I'm not using the fence for an operation, I can shut that blast gate off in particular and only have that lower one going. Now to get to the tool, one of these little reducers is used, and that allows you to actually hook up your flex hose. Flex hose goes right over that, and then you can use a clamp to hold that on there and get a good seal around here to tie in this flex line to your hardline piping. Now, as I mentioned before, flex line works great, but it does reduce the airflow a little bit because there's a lot of drag in here with the structure of the spiral. So I usually try to keep these as short as I can. The idea behind this flex line is that it allows you to get to the tool and your hardline piping doesn't have to be exactly perfect. You have a little bit of leeway with however much section of flex line that you have. Now, one thing I do like to do, and this is kind of something I decided that I wanted to do in the shop after using the dust collection system here for about 6 months, is I actually went through and added some of these magnetic quick connects at several of my tools. This allows me to hook up the main tool using the mating fitting, but then it also allows me to break that connection and add something like my big, long dust collection line that has my floor sweeper on it in case I want to vacuum the floor. It also gives me the option to roll in smaller tools that may be in storage, and I can have a matching fitting on there, but then I can immediately tie it right into our big dust collection system. So I've given you a lot of information on dust collection system, but the best piece of advice I can give you is to hook up with a company that specializes in dust collection. As I said, I went through Oneida when I did all of this. Get a good plan, and they can tell you exactly what they suggest for your shop, and that's going to give you the best opportunity to have a good system there. And I will tell you that having a nice dust collection system not only keeps your shop cleaner and makes it more enjoyable to work in, it also makes it much healthier for you, as all that ambient dust isn't floating around. You're capturing most of it right at the source. I'll go ahead and leave a link down below for that article that we published in Popular Woodworking, and we'll see you guys next time.